Welcome, everyone, and welcome back to another exciting episode of our series on Shivat Zion, on the Return to Zion. And what we're going to be looking at tonight is a section of Nehemiah, of what we call Ezra Nehemiah when we combine the books, that doesn't exactly belong. We're going to read two chapters, two prakim, that actually kind of almost don't go together. Scholars consider them to be actually separate from each other, but they are placed together as one flows into the other. Hopefully we'll have time at the end of the class to kind of look a little bit about what the Ethiopian community specifically does with these two chapters, or really with the first chapter more, but going into the second chapter, and how that has had resonance in that community. But first, let's look at it in its own context, and let's take a look. So without no further ado, I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to look at actually Nehemiah Perek Tet, that's Nehemiah chapter 9. Now, just for background, where it is placed in Nehemiah is, if you recall a while ago, when we read Ezra reading the Torah to the people. Okay, so it's placed right after that in the book of Nehemiah. And that's the context in the book. As I've noted elsewhere, the book of Ezra, the book of Ezra Nehemiah, or books of Ezra Nehemiah, are very highly edited. And we clearly see the kind of editing marks with these books in particular. Okay, so once again, this is picking up after Ezra reads from the Torah. Okay, and he reads it throughout, and he reads throughout Sukkot, and then they all gather for the 8th day for Shmini Atzeret, and then we go into our chapter. And it says, Uviyom 24 lachodesh hazeh, nesvu bnei Yisrael b'tzom u'b'sakim v'adama alehem. It says, on the 24th day of that month, they've all gathered together in fasting and sackcloth with dirt on their heads. In other words, in mourning, okay? In a state of mourning, we'll see a state of also atonement. Why? What does this have to do with anything? And what it seems, and I am going to essentially teach it this way, that this is a chapter that's been brought in from somewhere else, okay? This isn't actually happening. You could say probably in the original, it actually said what month it was instead of just saying it this month. Since it's now been placed after Sukkot, we're supposed to know what month it is. And so it no longer says the month, but it was probably not the month of Tishrei. But it was 24th of a month, and they're all coming in mourning. Possibly there's a reason, right? And who comes? V'yibadlu zera Yisrael mikol b'nei nechar, v'yamdu v'yitvadu al chatotehem v'avonot avotehem. The seed of Israel separated from all those who descended who were the sons of foreigners or were of foreign stock, and they stood and confessed their sins and the sins of their fathers. Now, this is unusual. Note that this idea of seed of Israel, where we're not looking at different categories of people. Remember how we're always seeing all these different categories of people in Ezra and Nehemiah. And here we don't see categories of people. It's seed of Israel and foreigners. And we'll see actually in the next chapter that the category is different. They're not separating out from foreigners in the same way. And again, this connects back to our last class when we're talking about what was the status of, or what was the reality of converts in this period, right? So this chapter seems to take a stance kind of against the idea of converts, because you have the seed of Israel and you have the children of foreigners. We're going to see the next chapter is a little bit different. So they come and they're confessing sins, and we don't know why. Vayakumu alomdam vayikru b'sefer Torat Hashem Elohehem revi'it hayom revi'it mitvadim u'mishtachavim l'Hashem Elohehem. So they stand in their places and they read the Torah for 1/4 of the day, and then for 1/4 of the day they are confessing their sins and they're bowing to God. ויקם על מעלה הלוויים ישוע ובני כרמיאל שבניה buni sherebia bani Hanani. And so a bunch of Levites come. And once again, we're not seeing the previous categorization that we saw. They're going to pray. Whereas before we had Levium, the Levites were more administrative, and the Meshorarim, the singers who sang prayers, right? At this point, they've melded. What we're used to. We're used to thinking of Levium as doing all those things. Levites sing and they pray. And that's what we're used to. But remember that we've seen elsewhere in the book that there was this other categorization. Here, the Levium, the Levites are doing everything, which is a reason again to think that this is possibly a later, or let's say just not in the same historical period exactly. Vayizaku b'kol gadol el Hashem Elokehem, and they cried in a loud voice to the Lord their God. And these names have they're not exactly the same, but they do kind of repeat. They're pretty parallel with some differences. These Levites say, Kumu Baruch Hashem Elokechem min haolam ad haolam ve'arvachushem kvotecha u'maramam al kol brachot hilah. So they said, now everyone praise God, essentially. Bless you, arise and bless God. And it says, and we're going to go now into a whole history of the Jews. Okay, so, and this history is going to have a very specific theme. Okay, Ata hu Adonai levadecha ata sita et hashamayim shmei hashamayim v'chol tzva'am ha'aretz v'chol asher alah hayamim v'chol asher bahem v'ata mechayek kulam u'tzva hashamayim l'chamesh tachavim. You, God, made everything. You made heaven, you made the earth, you made the sea, everything in them. You keep them all alive, and all the angels bow to you. You are amazing God, right? You created everything. And then Atahu Adonai Elohim asher bacharta ba'Avram v'hodseto me'or kasdim v'samta shmo Avraham. You are the person who took Avram, brought him out of Ur, and gave him the name Avraham, right? You shouldn't be called Avram anymore, you should be called Avraham. Umatzat et levavo ne'eman lefanecha v'chirot amo habrit latet et eretz haknani hachiti hamori haprizi v'yevuzi v'girgashi latet lizaro v'takem et dvarecha ki tzadikata. You promised this land essentially to Avram, and you kept your word because you are righteous. Batera et oni avotenu b'Mitzrayim v'zakatam shemata al Yam Suf. You heard our forefathers in Egypt. You heard their cry on the Red Sea. Vatiteno totu moftim b'Faro v'chol abadav v'chol amartso ki yadata ki yazidu alehem v'tas l'Hashem kayom hazeh. So you know, and then you did all the makot, right? All the plagues against all the wonders of Paro and his servants and all the people of his land, because you knew that the Egyptians essentially acted badly towards them, and you made a name for yourself. Okay, let's go through this relatively quickly. You split the Red Sea, you threw the Egyptians into the depths, you led them with a pillar of cloud by day, with a pillar of fire by night to give them light. You came down on Har Sinai, and you spoke to them from heaven, and you gave them the correct laws and commandments. And then you let them know about Shabbat. You gave them the laws through Moshe. You gave them the man to eat, right? You gave them water from rock. You said, go inherit the land. But so you gave us all these good things. You promised us the land, and that's what you did. You brought us out of Egypt. You brought us through the desert. You gave us food. You gave us water. And what did our forefathers do? They and our forefathers, they sinned, they stiffened their necks, and they did not listen to your commandments. וימאנו לשמוע ולא זכו נפלאותיך אשר עשית עמהם, ויקשו את עורפם ויתנו ראש לשוב לעבדותם במרים, ואתה אלוה סליחות, חנון ורחום, ערך אפיים, ורב חסד ולא עזבתם. They were so rebellious they wanted to actually to go back to Egypt to be slaves, but you, who are a merciful God and is purposely citing part of the midot, right, of the Shloshas Midot, the 13 attributes, because that's what Moshe says and what is revealed to Moshe so that God forgives Israel. You are a forgiving God and you did not leave them. Afkesu lehem egel masecha, even when they made the egel. Vayamru ze Elohecha asher helcha mimitzrayim. They said, this is your God who brought you out of Egypt. Ve'asu netzot dolot, right? And they did a lot of. Now, what's interesting is how much this parallels the written story we're familiar with from Chumash, right? So clearly, at this point, when they're saying this, they know the written. It seems like they know the written account pretty well. ואתה ברחמך הרבים לא עזבתם במדבר, את עמוד הענן לא שם עליהם, ביומם להנחותם בדרך, ואת עמוד האש בלילה יהיה להם. So again, pillar of cloud, pillar of fire, God brought you through the desert, okay? And again, you gave them manna from heaven, you gave them water to drink. ו40 שנה קלקלתם במדבר, לא חסרו שמותיכם, לא ולו, רגליהם לא בצקו. Right? For 40 years, you supported them in the desert, and miraculously, their clothes did not wear out. Their feet did not swell from walking. ותיתן להם ממלכות ועממים, ותחלקם לפאה, וירשו את ארץ סיחון, ואת ארץ מלך חשבון, ואת ארץ עוג מלך הבשן. Even before, right, even when they were going through the desert, even before they came to the land, you gave them. They were able to take possession of the land of Sichon, the land of the king of Heshbon, and the land of Og, the king of Bashan, right, on the east coast. ובניהם הרבית ככוכבי השמיים, ותביאם אל הארץ אשר אמרת לאבותיהם לבוא לרשת. Right, and you made their children numerous as stars, and you brought them to the land of white. And of course, as stars, we're fulfilling the promise to Abraham. And you delivered the Canaanite inhabitants to them with their kings and with their people of the land to do whatever they pleased with them. They captured all this. They captured the cities. They took possessions. Vayeshu batim le'im kol tuv, barod chatzuvim, kromim v'zeitim, v'etz ma'achal arov. They took possession of houses that were already filled with good things, wells that were already dug, vineyards, olive trees, orchards that were already planted. And they ate and they were satisfied and they grew fat and became kind of soft with all your goodness that you gave them. And then, of course, they rebelled. They defied you, they rebelled against you, and they threw the Torah that you gave them behind their backs. They killed your prophets that were telling them to return from their evil ways. And they did tremendous sins. Okay, so we can kind of see from the theme. God gave us all these things, we sinned. So you can see that the main theme is going to be kind of atonement. The main thing is going to be we sinned, we're sorry, we had all this coming to us, right? ותתנם ביד צריהם, ויצר להם, ובעת צרתם יצעקו אליך, ואתה משמיים תשמע, וכרחמך הרבים תיתן להם מושיעים, ויושיעו מיד צריהם. So you delivered them into the hands of their enemies, and they in fact did oppress them. And when they oppressed them, they cried out to you, and you heard them from heaven, and in your great mercy, you gave them people to save you, who were saviors, and they saved you from the hands of their enemies. And this sounds like it's actually parallel more to Shoftim, to Sefer Shoftim, where you have that kind of cycle where they constantly cry out to God, and God sends them a shofet to judge them, to lead them. And then as soon as everything was good again, they went back to do evil, right? Yes, Yeshua l'asad ra lefanecha, And so once again, they were oppressed by their enemies. Then came again, they called you, and you heard from heaven, and you would save them according as per your tremendous mercy. You told them return to your Torah, but they did not listen, right? And they didn't listen to your commandments and your laws, and they sinned against them. Those laws that a man should do to live by, as in Deuteronomy. They turned a rebellious shoulder and a stiff neck, and they didn't listen. And so God, you bore this many years, and you sent them prophets, but they didn't listen. And so you gave them completely over to the hands of the peoples of the surrounding lands. But by your great mercy, you didn't destroy them completely. This is, of course, the exile, right? So there was the exile, the land was given, the people weren't completely destroyed, right? And now, what is our situation? And this is very different from the entire rest of the book, okay? The way that our current situation is described in the return to Zion or in this period, completely different from what we've seen elsewhere in the book. ואתה אלוהינו האל הגדול הגיבור והנורא שומר הברית והחסד אל ימעט לפניך את כל התלאה אשר מצאתנו למלכנו לשרינו לכהנינו לנביאינו לאבותינו לכלמך מימי מלכי אשור עד היום הזה. Oh, great, mighty God who stays faithful to the covenant, don't take us lightly after all of this suffering that's overtaken all of us. Our kings, our princes, our priests, our prophets, our forefathers, and your whole nation from the time of the kings of Assyria. Remember the northern exile, from the time of the kings of Assyria until today. Look, we know that we deserved it. You are righteous in everything you did. You did truthfully, and we sinned. And those kings and officers and Kohanim and our forefathers who suffered, they didn't follow your law. They didn't listen to your commandments. Or the warnings that you gave them through your prophets. Right? When they had when they were still ruled. And when they were in all this wonderful, broad, rich land that you gave to them. But they didn't serve you. They did not return from their evil ways. Hine anachnu hayom avadim. We are slaves today. Va'aretz asher natata lavotenu lechol et pirya v'tuva hine anachnu avadim aleha. That same land that you gave our forefathers to eat its fruit and to enjoy its bounty, we are slaves on it. Utvu'ata marba lamelachim asher natata aleinu b'chatotenu v'al gviotenu moshlim uve'amtenu kirtzonam u'b'tzara gdola anachnu. Because of our sins, its great crops are going to the kings that you placed on us because of our sins. They rule over our bodies. They do with our animals as they wish, and we are in great distress. What is going on here? Completely different description of the rulers than what we've seen everywhere else in Ezra and Nehemiah. Everywhere else in Ezra and Nehemiah, what does the rule of Persia essentially mean? What is it? This is the salvation being given an autonomous region within the Persian Empire with our own ruler, and where we live in the land, build our temple and build our city. That is what God promised. That's the point of view of Ezra and Nehemiah. I'm not saying it's the point of view of every single book, but the point of view of Ezra and Nehemiah is that is what God promised. This is the fulfillment of God's promise to bring us back to the land. We're back in the land. We have our capital. We have a ruler. We've rebuilt our temple. This is it. This chapter is different. This is terrible. Here we are, we're back on our land, but we are slaves because the land actually doesn't belong to us. It actually belongs to the foreign king that has been placed over us. All that money, all the bounty goes to the king. It's not ours. The king can do whatever he wants to us, and we are in a situation of distress. What it seems to be is that this chapter, whether it's supposed to be something that afterwards is done on a regular basis or was just a one-time thing, is coming, in fact, during a period of distress. It's coming during a period of distress under foreign rule. The question is, at what point during foreign rule? Most scholars do place this in the Persian period. Some point in the Persian period. Some point you could say kind of in the return to Zion. Some place it, there are some outliers. Some place it actually in the Assyrian exile. They're like, hey, this is what's being said by people who stayed after the exile. Because that makes more sense. They're in the land, but they have a foreign king. But the problem is that it doesn't seem to, the language doesn't really seem to reflect something that early it seems to, in terms of language, in terms of the idea of the role of possibly the role of the Levium, of the Levites and other indicators, it doesn't seem to be that early. Some people want to place it. There are a couple of people who want to actually put it as Hellenistic, right? It's like very late. It wouldn't be. It does the attitude that having a foreign king over the land of Israel is by definition wrong, even if you are living in the land of Israel and you have some kind of control and you have a working temple. That is an idea that we absolutely see in let's say before the Maccabees, for example. Before the Maccabees, after the Maccabees, this idea that having any foreign king in this land is by definition bad, right? Even if you have a working temple, right? It's good that you have a temple, but it's not enough. It's not even close to enough. It's wrong. It's terrible. So to me, this doesn't read as something that's late. This is probably from some point of the Persian period, apparently when the kings are not so nice. There's some point where the rule was difficult, and this is a day of fasting and mourning so that God will have mercy on his people, with a recognition of, we know all you've done for us till now, God, and please continue to please listen to us now, because we have sinned, our forefathers sinned, and we recognize it.
Miriam,
yes.
If this is placed in the Persian period, is it assumed it's after the completion of the temple?
I would assume so. There are a couple interesting aspects of this. One is that there's no mention of the temple in this chapter, okay? Which is a little weird. Honestly, I wouldn't place it before building the temple just because the time under Cyrus and Darius seems to be okay king-wise. In other words, it doesn't seem to be like they're being oppressed by Cyrus or Darius. When Cyrus gives them support to build the Beit HaMikdash, Darius gives them support to maybe under Cambyses, right? You could say maybe under Cambyses, because I don't know, or Cambyses, or Cambyses, I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce it. Maybe under him, maybe that was a difficult period, because we don't know a lot about what that period was like. Right? I think that Sariafid places it later when you've got a working temple, right? I wouldn't be surprised if there is no working temple, because they're not talking about the temple at all. And so if they had permission to build the temple, they can't really say to God and help us build the temple. They've got permission. Why aren't they building it? Right? So it could be, I think, because there's no distinction between the Levites and the singers here, that's probably why Sariafid places it later. In other words, that it was later on when those two classes kind of melded together, as they have today, right? Today, we don't talk about a separate singer class from the Levium, from the Levites. So that would have been later when those roles kind of melded. So it's a pretty big question, because it really doesn't mention the temple at all, right? It's just not an issue here. So either the temple's working, so they have nothing to say with that, like everything's fine temple-wise. It's just some other issue that they're being oppressed, and that's why they're calling to God. Or it's waiting for them to build it, so there's nothing to speak about. So if we look at the next chapter, which is placed right after this, where it's and despite this situation, or within this situation, we are creating this covenant, right? In this passage, one is leading to the other, right? One is we are we are in great distress. And so we are affirming this covenant with you, God, as part of, us requiring your mercy. But we'll see that in this chapter, all of a sudden, the people who are there are different. The way we're talking is different. This chapter is much more in keeping, particularly with the later stories of Nehemiah we're going to see. All of a sudden, we're going to have Nehemiah here as a person. We have specific names that we kind of recognize. So it's going to be it's a very different thing. So it seems like the treaty happened at a different time, probably either I would say, during the second reign of Nehemiah, when Nehemiah comes back after being called to back to Persia. He comes back again. I'll say why it would be late at that point, or possibly after Nehemiah's rule, or at the end of Nehemiah's rule, where they're signing a covenant on things that absolutely are all themes within the story of Nehemiah. But in the book, the way it's placed is you're having everything is kind of coming one after the other. You have Ezra reading the Torah. Then you have this kind of getting together in mourning and atonement. And then we have a covenant, almost a renewed covenant. We see, and signing it are our officers, our princes, our Levites, and our Kohanim, our priests. V'al and signed on it are Nehemiah, Hatirshata, Ben Chachaliah, V'tzidkiah. So Nehemiah's come back, right? We didn't have him in the previous chapter. Baruch Meshulam, Abiyam Yamin, Ma'aziyah, Vilgai, Shmaya, Ela Kohanim. These are the priests. V'aleviim and the Levites, V'yeshua ben Azanya, Binoi b'bnei Chenadad, Kadmiel. So here are the Levites, these people. Vachehem and their brethren, Shvanya, Hodiah, Klita, Playa, Hanan, Micha, Rechov, and Roshei Ha'am, right? That's the people. So you have everyone's there here, the different groups, people are signing. Usha'ar Ha'am, HaKohanim, V'aleviim, HaShorim, HaMeshorim, HaNetinim. Now, here all our groups came back. Notice how in the last chapter, none of these groups existed. All of a sudden, we have everyone back that we're used to hearing about. We have not just our Kohanim and Leviim, not just our priests and Levites. We have the gatekeepers. We have the singers. We have the Netinim. V'chol hanivdal me'amei haratzot el Torat Elohim. Everyone who was separated out from the people of the land to the law of God. People who have essentially converted, right? As opposed to our previous chapter, which said that the seed of Israel separated out from the foreign-born people. Here we have specifically people who have joined the law of God, are also signed on this treaty. Nishehem b'nehem uvnotehem, their wives, their sons, and their daughters. Kol yodea mevin, all who can understand it. Machzikim alachehem adirehem uvaim ba'ala uvishua. They enter in with an oath. Lalechet b'torat Elohim asher nitna biyad Moshe eved Elohim. And in fact, we could even say, possibly because you have these people who are joining from other people, they have to say, yes, we're going to keep the Torah that was given to Moshe by God, right? But everyone's doing this. They need to follow the Torah of God that was given by the hand of Moshe, the servant of God, and to keep and do all the commandments of the Lord our God and his rules and statutes. And we should not give our daughters to the people of the land, and their daughters we will not take for our sons. Now, note that it's interesting because we already said there are some people who have joined, who have separated out from the peoples to follow the Torah of God. We're including them in this rule, right? They can't take sons or daughters from they can't marry people from the land, right? In other words, okay, these people have joined. They can't marry people from the land. Everyone who signed on this treaty can't marry people from the land, right? From the land, meaning natives not of Israel. ועמי הארץ המביאים את המקחות וכל שבר ביום השבת. Now I'll remind you that when Nehemiah talks about the problem with intermarriage, what does he say? He says their kids only speak Ashdodi. They don't even speak Hebrew, right? So the point is, if you have people who have separated out from the people in the land and they've joined the Jewish people and said, we're going to follow the Torah of God, that's not that. The problem is marrying these people who are just regular people from the surrounding nations. And here we see that idea really, really clearly. ועמי הארץ המביאים את המקחות וכל שבר ביום השבת למכור, לא ניקח מהם בשבת וביום קודש, וניטוש את השנה השביעית ומשע כל יד. Which this now we're on Shabbat. Okay, we're taking two different types of Shabbat and kind of joining them together. Those people of the land who bring stuff to sell, essentially on Shabbat, we will not buy from them on Shabbat or a holy day. And we will also forego on Shemitah year, right? That's the year Shabbat. The Shemitah year, the 7th year, we are not going to farm and we are not going to collect debts. Note that we didn't really see Nehemiah kind of going to bat for Shemitah, but he absolutely goes to bat for not selling and buying on Shabbat, right? That's something that's a big deal for him. And here everyone's signing that we're not going to do that. We're not going to buy from the foreign people are coming to sell. We will not buy from them. And here, the Beit HaMikdash is very central. We've got the Beit HaMikdash back, as it were. It's really sitting very centrally in what we need to do. And this also Nehemiah is very involved in. But Nehemiah is very involved in also making sure that the right money goes to the right people in the temple. So we'll each give a third of a shekel annually to the temple. ללחם המערכת ומנחת התמיד ולעולת התמיד השבתות החדשים למועדים לקדשים לחטאות לכפר על ישראל וכל ממלכת בית אלוהינו. This is just the third of a shekel is for regular upkeep, right? It's for the bread, it's for the regular grain offering, it's for the regular whole offering, it's for the offerings on Shabbat and on Rosh Chodesh, the start of the month, for all the holidays, and for all the sacrifices that are brought to atone for Israel as a whole, right? All of those need to come from a communal pot. So everyone has to give a third of a shekel annually. והגורלות הפלנו על קורבן העצים, הכהנים הלוויים והעם להביא לבית אלוהינו, לבית אבותינו, לעתים מזומנים שנה בשנה, לבאר על מזבח אדוני אלוהינו, ככתוב בתורה. And everyone also has to bring a wood offering, because we need wood to burn the sacrifices. ולהביא את ביקורי אדמתנו וביקורי כל פרי כל עץ שנה בשנה לבית אדוני, to bring the bikurim, right, the sacrifice for Shavuot, the first fruits. So if we need to bring that, we're promising to bring that. V'et bechorot banenu v'hemtenu, right, to sanctify the firstborn of our sons and our animals, kakatuv b'Torah, right? V'et bechorei b'karenu v'tzonenu lavi lebeit Eloheinu l'kohanim hamishartim b'beit Eloheinu. So we have to bring, right, the first of our animals and dedicate the first of our sons. V'et reishit arisotenu u'trumotenu ufri chol eitz tirosh v'tzar navi l'kohanim elishkot beit Eloheinu u'masar admatenu laleviim v'hem aleviim hamasrim b'kol arei avot. We have to bring the first part of all our dough, of all the various crops. We need to bring to the priests, to the chambers of the temple, which is where you bring your donations. And the tithes of our land need to go to the Levites, and those Levites are going to collect them in all the towns. That's how it's going to work. V'haya kohen ben Aaron im haleviim ba'aser haleviim. When the Levites come to take the tithes, they're going to have a kohen, a priest, with them. Okay? It sounds like maybe to kind of oversee it. V'haleviim yalu et masar hamaser lebeit Eloheinu ele l'shakot lebeit ha'otzar. They're going to bring a tithe of the tithe. Seems to be is for the priests. And that's why they need to have a priest with them to make sure that they're doing that, and the Levites will bring it. Ki ela lishachot yaviu b'nei Yisrael v'nei halevi et trumat hadagan hatirosh vayitzar b'shem klei hamikdash v'kohanim v'mishartim v'shorim v'lo nazov et beit Eloheinu. Because they are going to bring all of these things to the storerooms, the grain, the wine, the olive oil, and that is where the equipment of the singers is going to be, and that's where the priests and who are serving at that time in the temple and the gatekeepers and the singers are going to be there. They're not going to leave the temple. Why is this important? In Nehemiah's story, right, he comes back the second time and he finds that one of his personal enemies has set up shop within the chambers of the temple. He throws him and his stuff out, right? He like literally takes the stuff and just throws it out. But what was supposed to be in this chamber? And the answer is the tithes were supposed to be there, and no one's been bringing tithes. And all the Leviim, the Levites, have not had food and have gone home to farm because no one's supporting the Levites. And the priests are just getting, I guess, the meat from the sacrifices. There's a real problem. And that's one of the things that Nehemiah goes to solve. So here, this is a big part of what everyone has to promise. Yes, we will bring all our tithes, our first fruits, everything. We are going to bring it to the temple. That is what's supposed to be in these chambers. And we know that. So we will not neglect the house. Lo na'azov et beit Eloheinu, we will not neglect the house of God. So what have we seen? What do we see? What have we seen here? We've seen two different gatherings, okay, with different purposes. So the gathering we saw in Perek Tet in chapter 9 was a gathering of atonement and mourning, right? They're coming with sackcloth and ashes, literally fasting, to say, God, we recognize you've been kind to us through the ages. We have been sinning. Our forefathers sinned. Please have mercy on us because we are in great trouble right now with foreign kings ruling over us. It doesn't seem to reflect the same time period that most of Ezra and Nehemiah does. It's a very different attitude with it is different groups of Jews, as it were, or more melded and a different attitude to, a different idea also of the division between Jew and Gentile, you could say, and also a very different idea of what it means to live under a Persian Empire. Whereas once we're in chapter 10, we're back where we're used to, with all the different categories that we're used to, with essentially actual converts that are part of this covenant, and a covenant that includes Shabbat, it includes Shemitah year, it includes keeping the tithes and keeping the and supporting all the sacrifices that are very central to the temple. And all those are a big part of the covenant. Oh, and not taking foreign wives. Very important. We see two different gatherings. What's interesting is that the Ethiopian Jewish community takes Ezra. It isn't clear to me if I've seen different accounts. I've seen ones where they read parts of the chapter 9, but not 10, and also ones where they read 10 also as part of the covenant, right? They in Sigd, which is the 29th of Cheshvan, so it's 50 days after Yom Kippur. 50 days after Yom Kippur, they fast half a day. There's a lot of things that are parallel to what we saw in chapter 9. They fast. They actually, in Ethiopia, they would go and dunk in the river in the morning, and then they would go up to the mountain. And it's not just parallel, though, to Perek Tet, to chapter 9. Also, there are also parallels to chapter 8 when Ezra's reading the Torah to them. So they have it set up, they have a table set up for them to hear the Torah from, right? And they go up the mountain to hear the Torah. I believe they fast half a day, I think. And then there's a festival afterwards. But first they hear the Torah readings they hear are the revelation at Sinai with the commandments. They hear the curse texts from Vayikra and Varim. And that possibly is parallel to chapter 10 when it says they came in, that they entered Allah v'lishvuah, to the oath, and Allah can also mean curse, right? And it could be that they're reading those curse texts also as a parallel to the ceremony if they're reading chapters 9 and 10 together. And they read from Nehemiah 10, from chapter 9 of Nehemiah, reading, and it's understandable why, because it's the whole history of the Jewish people and God's kindness to the Jewish people, going up to, we are now in tremendous distress. God have mercy on us. There is an idea of atonement, that it's been 50 days since Yom Kippur. So there's an atonement aspect of Sigd. Sigd, of course, means to bow down. right? That's what the word means. They read these passages in Gez, in Ethiopic. That's their Torah is in Gez, which is the old Ethiopian language. Their Torah is essentially an Ethiopic translation of the Greek translation of the Bible. So it's an Ethiopian translation of a version of the Septuagint. Because sometimes people ask me, where is their version? Do we look at their version and see? Because the Ethiopian church was actually one of the earliest churches. They kept they kept Jubilees, they kept Enoch. That's how we have numerous copies of Jubilees and Enoch in Ethiopic. And so the Ethiopian Jews use essentially that Bible. Their Torah, what they call the Orit, is the 5 books of Moses, the Pentateuch, plus Yoshua and Shoftim, plus Joshua and Judges, and those are their books. So that's what they read. So why is this text so important to the Ethiopian Jews? Because it's a text that we don't read very much, right? We don't look at this chapter in Nehemiah, because in general we don't read as in Nehemiah a lot. But for Ethiopian Jews, this very much paralleled their experience, because they were looking for, on the one hand, they were looking for a kind of a Sinai experience, right? But the Sinai experience is one time. It's completely divine. Here as in Nehemiah, they had a ceremony, which is they're here where everyone got together. They were a returning exilic group that had been through a lot of crap, and they were getting together to hear the Torah, right? And they were getting together also in mourning or in atonement to hear the Torah. So here they could draw from a ceremony that already happened from Jews who had been through a lot and recreate it. And that's what they do every year. And they read these chapter, or at least chapter 9, and possibly a little bit of chapter 10 together, after they've read the story of the revelation at Sinai and the curses, which are also things that, again, the Jewish people entered into together. When asked, well, where did this tradition come from? Possibly one of the explanations that the Ethiopians give is that it was possibly from the 15th century, which was a time of real oppression by Ethiopian rulers. And so they were worried that they were going to scatter and forget the law, and people would leave. People would forget the law and not keep the law anymore. So this was a way of, yes, we are in distress, we are oppressed, but we will gather together and reaffirm keeping the law every year. I'm going to look at the questions. Why did the editor insert that history, mourning, repentance chapter between the Ezra Torah reading and the Amanah chapters? That's a good question. So I think it's because the editor had these different accounts and wanted them to be all in one flow, wanted them to be all in one ceremony. And that's why. So you have the way that it reads in Nehemiah, you're going from Ezra's reading of the Torah to everyone, and then he reads the Torah through the days of Sukkot. And after that, there's kind of this getting together to hear the history of Israel and to remember that God was good and yet we sin. And then after that, and that's why we're coming into a covenant. So it kind of bridges the covenant to Nehemiah's covenant, right?
Miriam?
Now, yes.
It seems to me that the account of the people mourning and fasting and crying, that flows very normally and naturally from the 8th parak, because in the 8th parak it says that Nehemiah read the Torah to them, and they started mourning and crying. And then he and the Kohanim said to them, you have to stop mourning and crying because this is a holy day to God. And so it's
so right after
like,
Sukkot, they go back to mourning
you have to wait, you have to put it off. Now it's Acharei Chagim. Now it's time to go back to mourning.
That is a good point, Moshe. I like that point. That's a good point. that essentially they weren't saying don't do it. They were saying just put it off till after the holiday. Now it's after the holiday. Go for it. Go mourn and cry. That's the time. That's a very good point. Yes. So it works well that way. So I think what's really nice about reading these chapters together is that we see ceremonies that are from Shivat Zion, from the Return to Zion, maybe from a little later than the Return to Zion, and that still resonate and have real meaning to groups today. And we can understand why, because it's speaking to the same experience in a lot of ways. So thank you very much for joining me, and I will see you all next week. Take care, everyone. Bye.